For the titans of our age, the private aircraft is the ultimate symbol of power. It is a boardroom in the clouds, a sanctuary above the chaos of the world, a place where deals are made and empires are managed at 40,000 feet. It is a bubble of absolute control. But what happens when that bubble is breached, not by turbulence or mechanical failure, but by the cold, calculating hand of a killer? What if the safest place in the world becomes a perfectly designed death trap? Tonight, we climb aboard a vessel of unparalleled luxury that became the stage for a seemingly impossible crime. We will follow the story of a visionary businessman who died mid-flight. His death immediately ruled a tragic medical event. But a pair of determined detectives, sifting through the wreckage of his life, begin to suspect that this was no accident. It was a murder, executed with chilling precision, miles above the earth, with a cabin full of suspects. Before we request clearance for takeoff on this turbulent investigation, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and engage your notification bell. You won't want to miss a single twist in the complex cases we navigate each week. Now, please fasten your seatbelts as we uncover the calculated, high-altitude murder of a man who thought he was on top of the world. The Gulfstream G650, christened Icarus, was more than an aircraft. It was a testament to the ego of its owner, Julian Croft. Its fuselage was a mirror-polished obsidian, its interior a minimalist masterpiece of cream leather, brushed steel, and sustainably sourced teak. It was a flying fortress of technology and a whisper-quiet cocoon of luxury. As it began its final, graceful descent towards the private airfield outside the city, slicing through the hazy gold of a late afternoon sky, it was the very picture of serene, untouchable power. The illusion shattered the moment the aircraft came to a complete stop. The airstair door did not immediately hiss open to reveal a waiting phalanx of black cars. Instead, a frantic, choked voice crackled over the airfield's private frequency. It was the pilot, a seasoned ex-Air Force captain named Hayes. "Tower, this is November Golf Charlie 1. We have a medical emergency on board. The principal passenger is unresponsive, requesting immediate medical assistance on the tarmac." I repeat, immediate assistance. The principal passenger, Julian Croft, was a man who was never unresponsive. At 52, he was a force of nature, a tech visionary who had built his company, Helios Innovations, from a garage startup into a global energy empire. His latest creation, the Prometheus Battery, a revolutionary, self-charging power source, was poised to change the world and make him not just a billionaire, but a figure of historical significance. He was a man of boundless energy, ferocious intellect, and a personality that oscillated between charismatic genius and tyrannical rage. When the airfield's paramedics finally boarded the silent, opulent aircraft, they found a scene of quiet, clinical chaos. In the main cabin, which was configured more like a futuristic lounge than an airplane, Julian Croft was slumped in his oversized, throne-like captain's chair. His face, usually flushed with vitality, was a pale, bluish-gray. A half-full glass of whiskey sat on the table beside him, its single, perfectly spherical ice cube still mostly intact. His eyes were open, staring with a shocking emptiness at the forward bulkhead. There were 4 other people on the plane, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and something less readable. There was Evelyn Reed, the COO of Helios, Croft's brilliant and ruthlessly efficient second-in-command. She was attempting to perform CPR, her movements precise but futile. There was Leo Croft, Julian's only son, a young man in his 20s with the haunted, angry eyes of someone perpetually in his father's shadow, who was backed into a corner of the cabin, looking physically ill. There was Damon Blackwood, the grim-faced CEO of a rival energy firm, a man Croft had been in the process of forcing into a hostile merger, his presence on the plane a sign of his imminent defeat. And there was Anya Sharma, the flight attendant, a young woman of preternatural calm, who was standing by with a medical kit, her face a mask of professional concern. The paramedics worked quickly, but it was a formality. Julian Croft was pronounced dead on the scene. The initial assessment, given his age, high-stress lifestyle, and the lack of any visible trauma, was a massive, sudden cardiac event. A tragic, but not entirely surprising, End for a man who lived his life at supersonic speed. That was the official narrative when detectives Frank Miller and Chloe Sanchez arrived. The private airfield had been cordoned off, the sleek jet now an incongruous, multi-million-dollar crime scene. Miller, a veteran homicide detective with a rumpled coat and a deep-seated belief that wealth was the world's most powerful motive for murder, took in the scene with a practiced, weary eye. Sanchez, his younger partner, a woman who saw the world in patterns and data streams, felt an immediate sense of unease. "It's a locked room at 40,000 feet, Miller grumbled as they ducked under the crime scene tape. "If this is a homicide, our suspect pool is the 4 people who were sitting right there with him. This is either going to be the easiest case of our careers, or the most impossible." They boarded the Icarus, the silence inside the luxurious cabin feeling heavy and unnatural. The body had been removed, but the ghost of the scene remained. The overturned medical kit, the lingering, sterile scent of antiseptic, and the whiskey glass, which had been carefully bagged by the first responders. Their first interviews took place in the airfield's sterile, impersonal VIP lounge, a world away from the bespoke luxury of the jet. The 4 passengers had been separated, each one a potential suspect, each one a piece of a puzzle that had not yet taken shape. Evelyn Reed was first. She was a woman in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, her composure almost unnerving. She was the picture of corporate control, even in the face of tragedy. "It was sudden," she explained, her voice steady, betraying no emotion. "We were about 30 minutes from landing. Julian was finalizing the Blackwood merger documents. He took a sip of his whiskey, and then he just gasped. He clutched his chest. His face, the color changed. We tried to help. I started CPR. Anya brought the defibrillator. But he was gone. It was that fast." Leo Croft was a different story. He was a bundle of raw, frayed nerves, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "He was a monster," he said, his voice a mixture of grief and venom. "A brilliant, world-changing monster. He controlled everything, everyone. My life, my money, my future. Am I sad he's dead? I don't know. I feel free. Does that make me a killer?" His alibi, like everyone else's, was simply being on the plane. He claimed to have been in the rear cabin, listening to music with his noise-canceling headphones on, trying to ignore the business talk. Damon Blackwood was pure, undisguised hostility. A powerful, imposing man, he saw the detectives not as investigators, but as an inconvenience. "This is a waste of my time," he snarled. The man had a heart attack. It was a stressful negotiation. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to save." He claimed to have been reviewing documents, seated directly across from Croft, when he had collapsed. He looked surprised, Blackwood added, a cruel, almost satisfied smirk touching his lips. I don't think Julian Croft had been surprised by anything in 20 years. Anya Sharma, the flight attendant, was the quietest. She provided a detailed, professional account of the flight's catering and service. "Mr. Croft had his usual," she said, her voice soft. "Macallan 25, 1 large, spherical ice cube. I poured it for him myself from a new bottle in his presence, as was his standard protocol. He was very particular about his whiskey." She claimed to have been in the galley, preparing the landing snacks, when she heard Evelyn Reed's shout. For people. For interwoven alibis. For powerful motives. Evelyn Reed stood to inherit the CEO position and take control of the company she had dedicated her life to building. Leo Croft stood to inherit a multi-billion-dollar fortune and his freedom from his father's tyrannical control. Damon Blackwood was saved, at the 11th hour, from a humiliating corporate defeat that would have destroyed his life's work. Even Anya, the quiet flight attendant, could not be dismissed. In a world of such immense wealth, who knew what secrets or allegiances she might be hiding? The case seemed destined to be closed as a tragedy, a footnote in the biography of a great man. But then came the preliminary report from the medical examiner, Dr. Evans. "This was not a standard heart attack, Chloe," Dr. Evans's voice said over the phone to Sanchez late that night. "His heart did stop, yes, but it was triggered by a massive, explosive systemic event. His body was flooded with histamine. This was anaphylactic shock. Anaphylaxis. Sanchez was stunned. But his records show no known severe allergies. We checked. Exactly, Dr. Evans said, his voice grim. No known allergies. But the evidence in his blood is irrefutable. He was exposed to a potent allergen, something his body had a catastrophic reaction to. And here's the other thing. I found this on his hand, almost invisible in a wrinkle of his knuckle. A tiny puncture mark, no bigger than a pinprick. There's no corresponding tear in his clothing. It's subtle, but it's there. The ground had just shifted beneath their feet. Julian Croft hadn't just died. He had been poisoned. The locked room in the sky was now officially a murder scene. The question was, how do you poison a man with an allergy he doesn't know he has, in a sealed cabin, surrounded by witnesses, and make it look like a natural death? Sanchez hung up the phone, a cold sense of dread and excitement washing over her. She looked at the manifest of the Icarus, at the 4 names listed below the victims. One of them wasn't just a passenger. One of them was a meticulous, cold-blooded killer who had managed to execute a perfect murder miles above the earth. The flight of the Icarus wasn't just a tragedy. It was a brilliantly calculated scheme. The Emmys report changed the atmospheric pressure of the entire investigation. The case of Julian Croft's death went from a tragic medical event to a sophisticated, high-altitude homicide. The 4 passengers were no longer just witnesses. They were the only possible suspects in a seemingly impossible crime. Detectives Miller and Sanchez knew they were dealing with a killer of immense intelligence and nerve, someone who could operate under extreme pressure and hide in plain sight. Their investigation would have to be equally meticulous, deconstructing the lives of everyone on that plane, searching for the one secret that would unravel the entire conspiracy. The central mystery was the allergen. How could a killer induce a fatal anaphylactic reaction in a man who had no known allergies? The first step was to identify the substance. Dr. Evans's lab worked around the clock, running complex mass spectrometry tests on Croft's blood samples. While they waited, Miller and Sanchez split their focus. Miller, the master of the human element, would dig into the complex, toxic relationships between the suspects and the victim. Sanchez, the digital archaeologist, would dive into the electronic entrails of Helios Innovations and the personal devices of everyone on board. Miller started with a second, more pointed interview with Evelyn Reed. This time, he met her not in the neutral territory of the airfield, but in her own sterile, glass-walled office at the Helios headquarters, a building that hummed with the power she now provisionally wielded. "Anaphylaxis?" she said, her composure unwavering, though Miller detected a new, almost imperceptible tension in her jaw. "That's extraordinary." Julian was meticulous about his health. He had a full medical workup every 6 months. If he had a severe allergy, he would have known. Unless it was something he'd never been exposed to before, Miller mused, watching her reaction. Something rare. Something introduced. He let the word hang in the air. "You worked with him for 15 years, Evelyn. You knew him better than anyone. Any secret health issues? Anything at all?" Julian Croft's greatest secret was that he had no secrets, she replied, her voice as cool and polished as the glass around them. He believed secrets were a weakness, a liability on a balance sheet. His life was an open book, albeit a terrifying one. But Sanchez, in her digital deep dive, was finding that the book had a few crucial, encrypted chapters. She had gained access to Julian Croft's personal server, a digital fortress that took a team of police technicians 2 days to crack. Inside, she found the truth of his relationships with the people on that plane. She found the draft of a new corporate structure, a plan to be enacted after the Blackwood merger. In it, Evelyn Reed, the loyal COO, was not promoted to CEO of the new, larger entity. She was to be shunted sideways, given a president of legacy operations, Titlia Golden Cage, a ceremonial role with no real power. The real power would have gone to a new board handpicked by Croft. He had used Evelyn to build his empire, and he was about to discard her like old scaffolding. Her motive wasn't just ambition. It was survival. For Leo Croft, the story was even more brutal. Sanchez found a series of scathing emails between father and son, culminating in a final, devastating message from Julian. He had attached a revised draft of his will. The new version invoked a morality and achievement clause, completely disinheriting Leo and diverting his entire multi-billion-dollar share to a charitable foundation. "You have proven yourself to be a worthless, parasitic drain on my legacy," Julian had written. "You will not squander my life's work on your pathetic, artistic delusions. You will get nothing." The email was dated the day before the fatal flight. Leo wasn't just a disgruntled son. He was a man who had been financially and emotionally executed by his own father. The leverage Julian held over Damon Blackwood was a file buried deep in an encrypted folder labeled Leverage. It was a meticulously documented dossier of financial fraud and insider trading Blackwood had committed early in his career. Croft had somehow unearthed this secret and was using it to force Blackwood to sell his company for a fraction of its worth. The merger wasn't a business deal. It was blackmail on a corporate scale. Blackwood wasn't just losing his company. He was facing total ruin and potential prison time. The data provided motive in spades for 3 of the 4 suspects. But Anya Sharma, the flight attendant, remained a ghost. Her records were clean, her life seemingly simple. But Sanchez was a believer in patterns. She cross-referenced Anya's employment history with the travel logs of Julian Croft and Damon Blackwood. She found it. 2 years prior, Anya had worked for a high-end catering company that had exclusively serviced Damon Blackwood's corporate jet. She had quit that job just 2 weeks before being hired by Julian Croft's flight operator. She wasn't a random employee. She was a plant. While Sanchez was uncovering the motives, the toxicology report came back from the lab. They had identified the allergen. It was a highly specific protein isolate, derived from the venom of the Brazilian wandering spider. It was an incredibly obscure and potent neurotoxin that, in a person with a specific rare genetic sensitivity, would trigger a massive anaphylactic-like event, a cytokine storm that would lead to catastrophic cardiac arrest. It was a biological smart bomb, lethal only to a person with the right genetic key. "This is insane," Miller said, looking at the report. "This isn't just murder. This is a work of biochemical assassination. How would the killer know Croft had this specific genetic weakness? And how the hell would they get their hands on spider venom protein?" The first question was answered by a stroke of luck and old-fashioned police work. Miller went back to Croft's medical history, not just the recent checkups, but his entire life. He found a record of a minor outpatient surgery from 8 years ago. Miller tracked down the anesthesiologist who had worked the procedure, a now-retired doctor. The old doctor remembered Julian Croft vividly. "He was a nightmare patient," the doctor recalled over the phone. "Arrogant, demanding. We did a full genetic panel before the anesthesia, standard procedure for high-risk patients. And we found it. A rare allele, a mutation on the HLA-DQ8 gene. It makes a person hypersensitive to certain complex proteins, particularly some found in arachnid venom. We noted it in his file, told him he should wear a medical alert bracelet. He laughed at us, said it was a statistical absurdity, and that he refused to advertise a hypothetical weakness. He had the official record sealed. The killer knew. They had access to the one piece of information Croft had tried to bury. The list of people who could have seen that sealed file was infinitesimally small. The second question, the source of the venom, was answered by Sanchez. She began running searches on the dark web, in encrypted scientific forums, looking for any mention of the specific protein isolate. She found a single, heavily encrypted transaction from 3 months prior. A research-grade quantity of the protein had been sold by a black-market biochemical supplier in Eastern Europe. The payment was made in untraceable cryptocurrency. But the buyer had made one tiny mistake. To set up the initial anonymous crypto wallet, they had used a temporary email address, which they had then deleted. But Sanchez, using her considerable skills, managed to recover the email's registration data. It had been created on a public library computer. Security footage from that library on that specific day and time showed a clear image of the person who had created the account. It was Evelyn Reed. The pieces were now falling into place with terrifying speed. The cool, composed COO, the woman who had been closest to Croft, had been methodically plotting his demise for months. But what about the puncture mark on his hand? Harding asked, pacing in front of the evidence board. How did she administer it on a plane, full of people, without anyone noticing? The answer had to be on the plane itself. They returned to the impounded Icarus, this time not as investigators of a crime, but as reconstructors of a specific, deadly moment. They walked through the scene again and again. The whiskey glass, the spherical ice cube, the seating arrangement. Sanchez's eyes fell on the custom-built teak table next to Croft's chair. The woodwork was beautiful, seamless, but she ran her gloved fingers along the underside of the armrest of Croft's chair, a place no one would ever think to look or clean. Her fingers snagged on something. Tucked away in a tiny, almost invisible recess, was a microscopic, retractable needle, no bigger than the tip of an insect's stinger. It was connected to a tiny, spring-loaded mechanism. "My God, Frank," she whispered. It was the chair. It was built into the chair. The full, diabolical ingenuity of the plot was suddenly clear. Evelyn, who had overseen the custom outfitting of the jet a year prior, had had this mechanism installed. On the flight, she had likely used a remote trigger, perhaps a simple app on her phone disguised as a calculator, to deploy the needle for a fraction of a second. Croft, engrossed in his work, would have felt nothing more than a tiny pinprick, a static shock, easily dismissed. The poison would have entered his system directly, bypassing any taste or immediate sensation. The whiskey glass, the collapsite was all misdirection, a perfectly staged scene to make everyone look at his drink, his heart, anywhere but the chair he was sitting in. The final element they needed was the why now. Why had she chosen this specific flight? The answer was on her work calendar. She had been the one to insist that the final, brutal merger meeting with Damon Blackwood happen on that flight. She had deliberately assembled all the prime suspects, with all their powerful motives, in one place. She had created a perfect storm of suspicion, a cloud of reasonable doubt so thick that she, the loyal, hard-working COO, would be the last person anyone would suspect. She hadn't just planned a murder. She had written a script and cast her fellow passengers as the perfect red herrings. The case against Evelyn Reed was a fortress of digital evidence and cold, hard science. They had the dark web transaction linked to her, the knowledge of the secret allergy, and now the diabolical murder weapon concealed within the very seat of the victim's power. But Harding and Sanchez knew that a jury would be facing a formidable opponent. Evelyn Reed was a woman who projected an aura of unshakable competence and control. To convict her, they needed to shatter that aura. They needed a confession. They brought her in. She walked into the interrogation room with the same icy composure she had shown from the beginning. Her lawyer, a man as sleek and expensive as she was, at her side. She sat down, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of weary indignation. "This has become a witch hunt, detectives." Her lawyer began immediately. "My client has been nothing but cooperative, and you are harassing her with wild, unsubstantiated theories." Sanchez started, her approach as methodical as the suspect herself. She laid out a series of documents on the metal table, one by one, like a dealer in a high-stakes card game. First, the printout of Julian Croft's proposed new corporate structure. "This is what he was going to do to you, Evelyn," Sanchez said, her voice quiet. "A ceremonial title, professional tomb. 15 years of your life, your genius, and he was going to put you out to pasture." Evelyn glanced at the paper, her expression unreadable. "Julian was a difficult man. We had our disagreements." Next, Sanchez laid down the heavily redacted medical file detailing Croft's genetic hypersensitivity. "A statistical absurdity," she quoted, looking directly at Evelyn. "That's what he called it. A weakness he wanted to bury. But you knew. You were his executive assistant back then. You saw every piece of paper that crossed his desk. You saw this, didn't you?" A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. "I don't recall," she said, her voice a clipped monotone. Then came the printout of the library security footage, the timestamp clearly visible, a still image of Evelyn's face, illuminated by the glow of a computer screen as she created the anonymous crypto wallet. Beside it, the manifest of the black market biochemical transaction. Research-grade Lycosa erythrognatha protein isolate, Sanchez read. You're a brilliant woman, Evelyn. I'm sure you told the supplier it was for some kind of organic battery conductor research. And they believed you. Evelyn's lawyer began to object furiously, but Harding cut him off, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Save it. We're past that. He leaned forward, his big, rumpled frame dominating the small room. Let's talk about the chair. The beautiful, custom-made captain's chair in the Icarus. The one you personally supervised the design and outfitting of. The one with the tiny, remote-activated, poison-tipped needle hidden in the armrest. That was the blow that finally shattered her composure. Evelyn Reed stared at Harding, her mouth slightly agape, the mask of control finally cracking to reveal the raw, stunned face beneath. The chair. It was the one piece of the puzzle she had believed was perfect, invisible, her secret masterpiece of engineering. You found it, she whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and a strange, cold admiration. We found everything, Evelyn, Miller said, his voice softening slightly. It's over. And then the confession came. Not in a flood of tears or a burst of remorse. It came like a corporate debriefing, a cold, logical explanation of a project that had been executed with ruthless efficiency. He was a parasite, she began, her voice gaining strength, infused with years of suppressed rage. A brilliant, charismatic parasite. He fed on the ideas and the energy of the people around him. The Prometheus battery. It was my design, my breakthrough. I brought him the core concept and he repackaged it, branded it, and sold it to the world as his own singular stroke of genius. He was a frontman, a salesman. I was the architect. And he was about to write me out of my own creation. She explained that she had discovered his allergy 8 years ago, filed the knowledge away in her mind as a contingency. When she found out about his plan to sideline her after the merger, she activated her plan. She described the meticulous, year-long process with a chilling, detached pride. The sourcing of the protein, the design of the delivery mechanism, the careful, deliberate assembly of the other suspects on the plane. It had to be that flight, she explained, her eyes alight with a terrifying intellectual fire. It was the only way. His death had to be surrounded by powerful, credible motives. The angry son, the ruined rival, they were my camouflage. They were the background noise that would drown out the quiet, logical truth. Who would ever suspect me? The loyal, indispensable COO. The one person whose motive seemed the most obvious, and therefore the least likely. She described the final moments. She had waited until the final descent, when everyone was distracted, strapped in and focused on the landing. She had her phone in her lap under a magazine. A simple tap on a custom-designed app, and it was done. Croft had flinched, a tiny, reflexive motion, and rubbed his hand, but then immediately dismissed it, turning back to his papers. The poison was fast. Within a minute, the reaction had begun. My only miscalculation, she said, a note of genuine academic frustration in her voice, was the puncture mark. The toxin was supposed to be delivered subdermally, without breaking the epidermis. The mechanism must have been calibrated a fraction of a millimeter too deep. A flaw in the execution. Otherwise, it was perfect. There was no apology. There was no flicker of guilt for the man she had murdered. There was only the cold, hard pride of a creator who believed she had every right to destroy the man who had tried to steal her legacy. Evelyn Reed was convicted of first-degree murder in a trial that captivated the world. The story of her diabolical, high-tech murder scheme became a legend of corporate ambition curdled into a deadly poison. Helios Innovations, deprived of both its visionary salesman and its true genius, was broken up and sold for parts. Its revolutionary battery technology tied up in a decade of legal battles, its promise to the world unfulfilled. Leo Croft, free but haunted, inherited a fraction of his father's fortune after legal fees and used it to disappear, finally escaping the name that had been both his privilege and his prison. Damon Blackwood, saved from ruin by his rival's death, rebuilt his company, a constant reminder of the brutal realities of the corporate world. Months after the verdict, detectives Miller and Sanchez stood on the tarmac of the private airfield, watching the setting sun glint off the wings of another sleek, private jet. The Icarus, stripped of its custom interior and sold to an anonymous foreign buyer, was long gone. All that brilliance, Sanchez said, shaking her head. All that planning, that genius, wasted on a murder. She could have started her own company, built her own legacy. She could have won a Nobel Prize. Some people don't want to build their own legacy, Miller said, his gaze fixed on the ascending plane. They want to burn someone else's to the ground. She wasn't just killing a man. She was taking back credit. The ultimate hostile takeover. The jet climbed higher, a silver speck against the darkening sky, a symbol of the rarefied world where ambition and genius could soar to incredible heights, or, as in the case of the flight of the Icarus, plummet into a darkness of its own making.